Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. I wanted to show you a printing press in an exhibition just to talk a brief amount about William Shakespeare and the way plays were printed in his time. It's also slightly different in those days. Let's say 400 years ago, you wanted to buy one of these books. On average, a play script, and these are slightly bigger books, but a smaller play script would cost the equivalent of about 10 times more than entrance into a theatre. If you put that into modern thinking, the equivalent of going to see, say, Phantom of the Opera for £100, a good price ticket, and then trying to buy the book of it in the lobby shop afterwards, and the book costing you £1,000. And the reason for that was how many people could read and write, therefore how expensive books were, because they realised they had to sell fewer of them and make more money from each of them. Today, if you were a writer, of course, you can use your laptop, you can use the internet, you can research. If you do this, you can look up a word, look up a historical fact, look up a date. But the way it was in Shakespeare's time is you sat and you wrote. And because you're writing on paper rather than on a laptop where you can edit constantly, every available bit of space on that paper was used. So Shakespeare's manuscripts would have been, they called them foul papers, F-O-U-L, would have been quite untidy. You had to blot out words now and then, re-spell them, re-scribble them in a corner. But when he came to sell manuscripts to a theatre, Shakespeare sold them as a scroll, a long, written, maybe too long, maybe a 4-hour play, which then when the theatre bought, it owned. So Shakespeare in the early days was not getting royalties or residuals. He wasn't getting a payment for each play. He simply got payment when he sold a manuscript. It only really became a play once it was performed. 7 years after he died, two of Shakespeare's acting company, Hemming and Condell, gave 36 manuscripts to a publisher. And that publisher printed what we now call the first folio. Now, if you think we're working from a manuscript, and maybe the printers, there might have been 5 or 6 printing presses working on a print run. Paper's expensive, ink is expensive, time is expensive, and they're working from something quite unintelligible from the days when there was no real official way to spell. You worked with something like this. Now, it's not the most legible writing in the world, but what you're doing is looking at that manuscript and thinking that's not one page, that's about 4 pages worth. So you have to ascertain and deduct and mark where you think a page would be on these foul papers. Then when it comes to putting the letters together on a page, you might find you've underestimated, and there are actually too many words on that page to print. So you have to possibly change some of the words, take some of them out. You might even have to cut a character. So instead of two people speaking and one asking the other one questions, to keep in all the dialogue, to save space, you cut a character completely, and then the one character, the lead character, would be asking themselves questions. So it becomes a speech with rhetorical questions rather than a duologue, a two-handed scene. So the printers, in a way, had a hand in the creation of Shakespeare's work. They worked with very intricate machines, first invented by Johannes Gutenberg, and in the UK by William Caxton. And they worked with movable type for the first time. And these are two cases. So you have, at the top, the uppercase, and at the bottom, the lowercase. So two physical cases of letters. The uppercase contained the capital letters. The lowercase contained the smaller letters. And that's where we get the words uppercase and lowercase. So not only are they working with individual letters, they're also working with spaces. Everything has to be held together. With pressure. So you can see here, this is what we call a folio page, and you can see bottom left of the screen, the letters are there, but also the individual spaces, lead type, have to be entered as well, and then held together. And then you would blot the words with ink. Bear in mind they're all written upside down and back to front. And then you bring that lever over, and pressure from the paper onto the individual letters creates the page. Each page size was like what we would now consider an annual. So if you have maybe you're writing an 8-page book, a novel, let's say, you're printing on the same size paper when you do that. And I'm going to try and explain this to you now on this little bit of paper here. So imagine you're writing a novel back then. You're printing 6, 11, 10 and 7 on one side of the paper, and then you're drying that side of the paper, and then you're getting the letters ready to print on the other side. It's okay if you had 1 page on this sheet of paper, but you haven't, you've got 4. So then you've got 8, 9, 12 and 5 on the other side. So you can see, if you over or underestimate, as one of the printers, the compositors were the people who put the letters together, you could end up having to get rid of words, or you could end up spacing things out a little bit more. And then it's folded. So we're talking 5, 6, 7, 8, and now in line because you folded the paper in a particular way. But when it's unfolded, it kind of doesn't make sense, and each page, the one above it, is back to front. So the printing of the plays was part of the creative process as well. And 7 years after Shakespeare died, the first folio, the book, came out. Most of the first folios now, there are a couple of hundred in existence, and most of the complete copies are owned by the Folger Library in Washington. And they worked out, by collecting so many of them, that there were at least 9 printers at work creating the first print run of what we now call the first folio. 18 of those plays had never been printed before. Shakespeare wrote manuscripts like today somebody would write a screenplay. You wrote it for performance, you didn't write it to get printed. Most people, as I said, could not read or write. Then, when the plays were printed, who bought them but the rich, the elite, the establishment, the aristocracy? And they took those plays. And those plays, they said, well, these are art. They're high culture, like poetry, sculpture, classical music. They're not entertainment for the masses anymore. So reading Shakespeare became almost more important in the English culture as going to a theatre to experience it. But the way I like to look at it, if you liked a particular band, let's say I played you in the 1960s, the Beatles, Love Me Do for the first time. Now that could blow your mind, that could take you to a different place, it could change your way of thinking about music for the rest of your life. If I gave you the sheet music of Love Me Do, it's not going to have the same effect. So one of the things they do at the Globe Theatre is they promote the performance of the plays, the eye contact between actor and audience. And they make sure that people realise that people went to the theatre to experience Shakespeare. Their first experience wasn't in a classroom. And these printing presses, even though they are important, and even though we wouldn't have 18 of Shakespeare's plays if it wasn't for the printing process, they also have a lot to answer for. Because nowadays Shakespeare is taught in school, and often those kids read Shakespeare or have to study it before they ever go to the theatre. And Sam Wanamaker at the Globe in the 1950s, when he decided to reopen the Globe and rebuild the Globe, said we should be going to the theatre before we read the plays. He said Shakespeare was for everyone. Do join me again, do share, do subscribe, and I will see you very, very soon.